Hello everyone, I'm Anya. I manage business development at Kmine. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to visit and follow our LinkedIn page. It's the best way to keep up with our latest announcements and upcoming webinars. Huge thank you to each of you for joining us today. Your support is greatly appreciated. In today's webinar, we're going to dive into critical minerals and the challenges facing the industry, including global regulations, consulting hurdles, extraction techniques, and legal issues. This session is great for professionals that look to boost their knowledge and tackle the challenges head on, but it's also perfect for anyone who is actually interested in the subject of critical minerals and green energy, clean energy overall. So let me start by telling you a bit about Kmine. We began our journey in Ukraine back in 1994, and by 2024, we've grown our presence across Europe, Asia, the United States, and Canada. Our team is a great mix of developers, surveyors, geologists, and mining engineers. We also have experts qualified for NI 43 and JORC reports, so we pride ourselves to serving a wide range of clients from small exploration groups to large corporations, all with a cost-effective approach. Our core offering is our software, designed as a comprehensive solution for the mining industry. It guides you through every stage of your mining project, from exploration to full production, with 12 versatile models suitable for both open pit and underground mines. What makes our software ideal for both small and large corporations is the flexibility. You can choose the models that best fit your workflow, whether you need just one or all 12. The software ensures ease of use with a single, straightforward interface. These models handle everything from processing geological data and surveying to developing optimized mining plans for both short and long-term projects. By integrating our software with IoT devices or dispatch systems, you can monitor all of these processes in real time, enabling quick and informed decision making. Our software, though, is built from real-world experience, and it's developed to tackle the challenges that we've encountered in our consultancy work as well. So today we offer reports compliant with NI 43, SK 1300, and JORC standards for various stages, whether it's pre-feasibility, feasibility study, mineral resource estimation, or preliminary economic assessments. Our expertise covers a wide range of hard rock commodities, including critical minerals. So if you're interested in learning more about our offering and how we can assist you with your project, please feel free to reach out to us in the comment section. So as I mentioned earlier, in today's webinar, we dive into the world of critical minerals and the challenges the industry faces. We'll explore what sets strategic and critical minerals apart, discuss global regulatory approaches, and tackle the consultancy hurdles in this sector. Plus, we'll cover modern extraction techniques and legal challenges that come with them. And we're excited to have two special guests with us, Brian Savage. He's a CEO of Electric Metals, and Guy Winter is a partner at Faskin and member of the Critical Minerals Expert Committee. I'll invite them to join the discussion shortly, but first I'd like to give you a bit of a background information on the subject. So critical minerals are crucial for our national security, economy, renewable energy, development, and infrastructure. But what exactly are they? How are they defined? So the Energy Act of 2020 defines a critical mineral as any non-fuel mineral or substance that has a high risk of supply chain disruption and essential for energy technologies, including those for production, transmission, storage, and conservation. Some examples of critical materials include aluminum, cobalt, copper, lithium, magnesium, manganese, and nickel. The demand for critical minerals is expected to grow rapidly. The list of these minerals also may change and expand over time. Different countries have their own unique lists based on their specific needs and their specific priorities. For example, Japan and Canada has identified 31 critical minerals. The UK considers 18 minerals critical, and the European Union has 34. India, though, has identified 30 critical minerals based on factors like their impact, versatility, and import dependence. Since our company is originated from Ukraine, I cannot not mention that Ukraine is rich in ore occurrences and deposits of critical minerals, including graphite, lithium, manganese, tantalum, and beryllium. Notable deposits include Novopoltava apatite, rare metal deposit, then the Azov rare earth deposit, and Sushano-Perzhavskaya zone, among others. These areas require geological exploration and research, and rare earth metals actually could become a significant asset for Ukraine post-war, even if you start from scratch. To make this happen, though, Ukraine will need to establish a production cluster and a special economic zone. This will require a political will, clear regulations, and economic and fiscal incentive for investors and operators, and also the transparency from courts and law enforcement agencies. Strategic investors and system operators would need legal stabilization mechanisms, and these mechanisms offer real protection for investors and build confidence for long-term and complex projects. Critical minerals, also known as strategic minerals, and they may seem synonymous, but countries define them really differently. The United States has a federal agency for strategy for critical minerals, similar to Australia. China and Japan have detailed policies for their strategic minerals. One major difference is that the US explicitly excludes fossil fuels like oil and gas from its definition. In November 2023, the European Parliament and the Council reached a preliminary agreement on the Critical Raw Materials Act. They created a list of 34 critical raw materials, including 17 strategic raw materials. This agreement also added aluminum to the list of minerals and metals covered by the Critical Raw Materials Act. The assessment screened 70 candidate raw materials, comprising 67 individual materials and 3 material groups, which includes 10 heavy rare earth elements, 5 light rare earth elements, and 5 platinum group metals. 4 new materials also were added. It's neon, krypton, xenon, and roundwood. Titanium metal was assessed separately from titanium, while aluminum and bauxite were merged for consistency. Although copper and nickel did not meet the critical raw material threshold, they were included on its list as strategic raw materials under the Critical Raw Material Act. Analyzing key raw materials like lithium, copper, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth metals reveals an interesting global picture, highlighting that China's clear and systemic dominance in these sectors. China processes about 87, 88 of rare earth metals, nearly 60% of lithium, and over 60% of cobalt. Additionally, China has almost complete control over the deep processing of graphite. A more accurate term for rare earth metals is rare earth elements, which include 17 metals. 14 are from the lanthanide family, with the remaining 3 being scandium, yttrium, and lanthanum. Rare earth elements are crucial in producing permanent magnets, especially neodymium, which is used to make the strongest permanent magnets available. These neodymium magnets are a combination of neodymium, iron, and boron. Wind turbines and electric car engines require neodymium permanent magnets, and these green technologies are the main drivers of global demand for neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium, and terbium. Permanent magnets are also essential for smartphones, audio equipment, robots, factory automation, aviation equipment, and high-speed elevators. Even though the United States and Australia are increasing production, China's geographic concentration of refining is still a significant challenge. China's strategic metals, though not officially classified, can be divided in 2 groups. It's one group is strategic scarcity minerals, and the other one is strategic advantage minerals. Strategic scarcity minerals are those for which China does not have enough domestic production to meet its needs, such as oil, gas, iron, and copper. On the other hand, advantage minerals are those that China produces and processes in large quantities, such as rare earth elements, which can be used as strategic leverage due to China's dominance. So now I would like to bring Brian Savage into our conversation. Brian is the CEO of Electric Metals, a US-based mineral development company with manganese and silver projects focused on supporting the transition to clean energy. Brian, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Anya. It's great to be here. That was an absolutely great overview of the critical minerals sector. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. So maybe you can dive into more details in difference between strategic and critical minerals. I know I kind of like highlighted the maybe some bullet points, but since you're in the industry, let's put it this way, you can dive deeper into the subject.
Sure. If you could bring up that slide deck so people could see some of those. If we move to the next slide, just to give you guys an overview of what I'd like to quickly talk about. The big question is, how do we get here? We need to understand how we got here to make sure that we know where we're going. The law of unintended consequences. Where are the minerals mined and processed? And I think that Anya gave a great overview of that. And then we'll touch on the critical and strategic minerals. So next slide, please. How did we get here? It didn't happen overnight. If you go back to the 1940s, it's pretty much the World War II war effort. The U.S. industry in particular had an integrated domestic supply chain, and they developed world-class R&D. Then we marched down the track, and in the 1960s, environmental activism started. And that was really the demand for clean air and clean water. And as a result of that, the US EPA was formed in the 1970s. And they really started forcing all companies, not just mining companies, chemical companies, processing companies, to clean up their act. The 1970s, as a result of that, was really a decade of not in my backyard. And that started moving the mineral supply, the processing, and all the R&D outside of outside the U.S., primarily over to China. And so, we're marching down the track in the 1970s. We're merrily pushing everything out of the country. And then in 2010, a little bit of a wake-up call for some people anyway, was the China-Japan rare earth trade war, where I think China was doing some fishing in the Japanese waters, and they didn't like that. And so basically what happened was China withheld rare earths to Japan, and that had a severe impact on the Chinese economy. Should have been a big wake-up call. I don't think so. Then we move into the 2020, and that's when COVID really exposed the vulnerability of supply chains and threw a big monkey wrench into what you might call the just-in-time inventory situation. 2022, Europe woke up to the folly of relying on Russian gas as a result of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. And then also, I think in 2022 was really when the United States finally started waking up to the fact that it realized that it had exported its mineral supply, its processing, and its R&D 50 years ago. And now what do? They had a lot of catch up to do. So next slide, please. The law of unintended consequences goes back to the climate change situation. And people are saying it's being caused by the hydrocarbons and carbon. And so hydrocarbons and carbons are out. Climate change demands a green energy transition. And you combine that with social mood, government regulation, and incentives, and that's driving the electrification of everything to get rid of the hydrocarbons. Now, once you start electrifying everything, that's driving the demand for the minerals that are critical. And those are all the minerals that you were just talking about in order to have this green energy transition. And then the policymakers wake up, oops, we don't produce them anymore. So now what are we going to do? And that creates the critical minerals rush. And that requires now in my backyard. And that's why we have the list of all the various critical minerals, because we stopped producing them, we stopped processing them, and now we need them in order to have our green energy transition. So if we move to the next slide. I think Anya, you did a superb job with listing out where the critical minerals are mined and processed. But just to focus in on a few of them, Indonesia has about 60% of the world's nickel. The Congo's got about 80% of the world's cobalt. Although Bolivia and Argentina are really have the largest resources of lithium in the world, it's really Australia who's producing the most, and then I think Chile comes in the next. And the real issue is that China really processes the majority of our critical minerals, and the world is pretty much reliant on China for all of those minerals that are required for the green energy transition. And we move on to the next slide. The difference between the critical and strategic minerals, as you had mentioned, most countries have their own designations of what they consider critical. The EU in particular, as you mentioned, has designated 34 minerals as critical, and those are the ones that are important for the EU economy and face a risk of disruption, primarily because of the supply chains and where they're located and where they're processed. And they designated 17 of those 34 as strategic because of their importance and global demand and supply imbalances. And again, that gets right back to the various supply disruptions. From a function of how do you incentivize that, we discussed in a previous slide that it's government incentives. I think the United States is probably the leader with the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and that's really creating a lot of investment demand into the United States, and in some cases at the disadvantage of Europe, the Nordic countries, because there's so much incentive to come here.
All right, well, thank you so much, Brian. We'll get back to Brian in the end of the webinar. I would like to ask him like some follow-up questions, but I would like our next speaker also will join us, so please stay with us. I do want to emphasize that the urgency of transitioning to clean energy is putting increasing and continuous pressure on mining companies. They need to develop new technologies for extracting these materials from primary sources and explore potential secondary sources. Modern technologies in the mining industry still focus on traditional methods. For example, hydrometallurgical processing typically involves leaching reactions in acidic environments using inorganic acids like sulfidic, nitric, and hydrochloric acids. However, recent innovations have shown that using organic acids can be beneficial. For example, there is a new recycling method for lithium-ion batteries that uses only organic acids, and this approach produces high-purity cobalt and lithium products. Additionally, the separation and purification steps of leach liquor often face economic and environmental challenges with solvent extraction and ion exchange resins. On the other hand, ionic liquids and deep eutectic solvents have shown both economic and environmental feasibility. So the well-known solvent extraction technique typically involves using organic extractants diluted in flammable and toxic solvents. However, new technologies are emerging that aim to replace these harmful reagents with non-toxic alternatives, or even to eliminate the need for reagents altogether, like with the membrane technology. Membrane technologies are quite exciting. They include in developing materials that separate metals and organic compounds through nanofiltration, ultrafiltration, and electrodialysis. These methods are also being explored for CO2 separation, purification, and capture from industrial processes, including recycling. On another note, the topic of deep seabed mining is gaining a lot of attention and active discussion these days. So what it is, deep seabed mining is an emerging industry looking to extract valuable minerals from the ocean floor. The aim is to obtain minerals like manganese, copper, cobalt, zinc, and rare earth metals. These minerals are found in three main habitats on the seafloor: the abyssal plains, seamounts, and hydrothermal vents. So commercial deep seabed mining hasn't started yet, but several companies are working to make it a reality. The proposed method for nodule mining involves deploying a large mining vehicle resembling a three-story tall tractor to the seafloor, and once it's there, it vacuums the top 4 inches of the seabed, sending sediment, rocks, crushed animals, and nodule up to a vessel on the surface. And on the ship, the minerals are sorted, and the remaining wastewater slurry consists of sediment, water, and processing agent are discharged back into the ocean. The ocean holds a vast wealth of mineral resources, some in unique concentrations, and legal constraints in 70s and 80s slowed the development of DC mining, but many of these issues have been addressed by the International Seabed Authority, leading to growing interest in the seabed mining technology. A Norwegian study, though, has identified a significant quantities of metals and minerals from copper and rare earths on the seabed of the country extended continental shelf. It's estimated that about 24 million tons of magnesium and 3.1 million tons of cobalt are contained in manganese crusts, which have grown on bedrock over millions of years. I see we have some delay here. So this crust also hold 1.7 million tons of cerium and rare earth metal used in alloys, along with other rare earth metals like neodymium, yttrium, and dysprosium. However, Norway's deep-sea mining plans have faced heavy international criticism. Currently, 24 countries, including 7 EU nations like Finland, France, Germany, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden, are calling for moratorium or pause on the industry. And multinational companies such as Google, Samsung, Northvolt, Volvo, and BMW have pledged not to source any minerals from the seabed. So improvements in existing technologies could reduce the need for primary critical minerals. For example, geologic AI builds high-end quartz scanning solutions with sensors, digital core table, and modeling capabilities. Their AI-powered tools provide geologists with accurate and high-quality data, making the analysis process more efficient and accessible. IROX technology is another innovation delivering short and high-intensity bursts of energy with pulse power technology to efficiently shatter mineral ore. Lilac technology is working on high-performance, low-cost ion exchange approach for extracting lithium from brines, known as direct lithium extraction. This method eliminates the need for traditional evaporation ponds and supports the growing lithium-ion battery market and the EV revolution. Electroflow Technologies is developing an electrochemical process that uses lithium selective electrodes to convert saltwater brines into lithium chemicals for batteries. And the process is ideal for brines with a low lithium content. It reduces the need for excessive chemicals reagents and offers high scalability with a modular cell stack design. The International Energy Agency says that to reach net zero emissions by 2050, we need to boost the supply of critical minerals by 3.5 times by 2030 to meet energy demands. And their analysis of more than 100 mineral projects, mostly involving copper, cobalt, copper, graphite, lithium, manganese, nickel, rare earths, lanthanides, or zinc, reveals that nearly 60% of projects reported pre-production delays ranging from several months to several years between 2017 and 2023. Okay, my team tells me that there is some problem with the presentation. All right, regarding deep seabed mining, we already talked about it. So next slide, please. Yes, also talked about it. Different companies that use different that innovate the technology with AI and new technologies that involved with the harmothermal water. Next slide, please. Okay, here we are. So the three biggest reasons for delays in developing critical mineral deposits are permitting issues, technical issues, and commercial issues. Sustainability concerns, especially environmental issues and stakeholder opposition, also significantly contribute to these delays. In addition to reducing the risks of extra upfront costs and preventing early stage project delays, there is a growing emphasis on consolidating ESG standards, and this raises questions about the accuracy of mineral resource assessments and the quality of mine design reports. And our company not only offers software for deposit modeling and mineral resource estimation for critical minerals, but also provides services for exploration design, open pit and underground mine design, preparation of exploration reports, and calculation of reserves and resources. Our reference list includes projects for developing deposits of titanium, graphite, zirconium, beryllium, and more. What we see that greenfield projects are taking off fairly quickly, but the ore deposits of critical minerals often involve complex ores that are tough to enrich and process. This requires a modern and tailored approach to assess the economic viability when providing consulting services. When providing consulting services, the companies also must offer effective tools for project coordination and optimize the selection of laboratories, technological programs, and initiative from specialized institute engineering companies and R&D centers, which is what we do. Another trend we've encountered is that the updating and reevaluation of previously mothballed deposits and or occurrences under new economic conditions. Such projects also often face unique challenges when performing pre-feasibility study, including previously completed underground or open pit mine workings, uneven sampling networks of ore bodies, lack of geometallurgical studies, and sometimes even partial or complete lack of data on wells and mining site location. So finally, I'd like to discuss the legal challenges of handling critical minerals. To help us with this, I'd like to invite Guy Winter, a partner at the law firm Faskin. He's also a member of the Critical Minerals Expert Committee and advisory board of the Critical Minerals Association in the UK. So he has extensive knowledge on the subject. Guy, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Anya. And I really like those graphics on the deep sea mining. I'd not seen those before, but yeah, a very controversial topic, which is perhaps one where legal challenges particularly come into play. So good afternoon, Anya, Brian, everyone. It's a very exciting time in our sector, but it's also one where there's some really fundamental challenges for lawmakers and law followers, which is the rest of society and the mining sector, to deal with. If we could bring up the first slide in my presentation. So
yeah, next slide.
Wine. And that's possibly particularly true on a Friday afternoon like this, when the sun is out. And I think I've brought out a couple of quotes here, which I think sum up quite effectively the fundamental challenges that face regulators in our critical minerals sector. And so when Adam Smith made this observation, essentially he was embodying a kind of free market philosophy that if you have a situation where the materials can be brought in more cheaply from elsewhere, and the wine could be produced at a fraction of the cost that it could be produced for in Scotland, then why would you build tariff barriers to block the importation of those products? And obviously that's a philosophy that underpinned all Western trade philosophy for many, many years. And Brian articulated the way that the consequences that has had in terms of allowing important industries and, more importantly, entire supply chains to leave the West. Now, what Adam Smith did not necessarily anticipate, and what the 1970s regulators did not anticipate when they allowed that to happen, was, of course, the very fundamental changes that we face today in terms of geopolitical stress and also, most importantly, climate change. And if you look at the next quote, which is from Dudley Kingsnorth, this embodies the modern challenge that we have in critical minerals. France will sell you a bottle of wine, but it won't sell you grapes. And this increasingly is the fear, and Brian referred to the Japanese rare earth crisis, and that rare earths as a geopolitical tool has raised its head a few times subsequently. China doesn't want to sell you rare earths. It wants to sell you wind turbines and electric vehicles. And so the threat for the West is that its entire manufacturing base, and obviously in continental Europe, there's a very, very strong history in the automotive sector, will be undermined if there isn't access to these vital critical minerals. If we can move on to the next slide, we'll just have a look at the regulatory environment that this has brought about. So as I say, critical minerals projects have to be seen from a legal perspective in an environment which has got three very strong drivers. The energy trilemma, which is to say security of supply, affordability, and sustainability. Commodity ultra volatility, which has really is a massive commercial pressure on developing critical minerals projects, because the price signals that we expect, the market that you need in order to finance a project, have been quite challenging in the critical minerals space. And then geopolitical discord. The reason that the free market model has essentially broken down is because there's a sense that for security of supply, for national security, that we can't rely on a single supply chain. So what we've seen is a very, very strong driver to diversifying the supply chain for critical minerals. Now, we've seen in the West, in recent times, a very strong regulatory response to these challenges. And Brian articulated the kind of key regulatory measures that have defined the Western response. The Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, the EU Critical Raw Materials Act in the European Union. And I would suggest that there have been also some very, very important developments around that. The EU Taxonomy for Sustainable Activities. Now, what that is very, very advanced in terms of energy technologies, but it still doesn't take full account in terms of the EU sustainability of the critical minerals that form part of the supply chain. The EU battery regulation, which is a really fascinating, innovative piece of lawmaking, and that has introduced concepts such as the battery passport. And that's designed to ensure the sustainability at the root of the critical minerals industry. So initially, there were very grave concerns with, for example, the use of cobalt from the DRC, which may have involved child labor, coercive labor in other jurisdictions. And so the battery regulation is designed to make sure that sustainability strand of the energy trilemma is being met. Another very, very significant strand in recent times has also been increased scrutiny of foreign direct investment into the critical minerals sector. And the Investment Canada Act has been a particularly conspicuous example of that. And there have been some very high-profile cases of purported Chinese investment into Canadian mining projects. And importantly, not just mining projects where the assets are located in Canada, but also where the company developing the asset is traded on a Canadian stock exchange. And that level of scrutiny is a very important factor that we have to take into account whenever we're looking to M&A activity and fundraising activity in this sector now. So wherever you are, be it in Canada, the US, or the UK, Australia, where under the FIRB they've had a long history of that kind of regulatory intervention, that is something that is very important to stay on top of whenever you are doing deals in this sector. Now, if we could just move on to the next slide, we'll take a bit of a look at some of the more specific regulations that we've seen. And so we touched on the IRA, as Brian did, but there's also a host of more minor legislation around that. For example, the US Mining Schools Act, which is designed to rebuild the mining sector in the US. And the skills gap is a huge issue throughout the Western world, where, for example, in the United States, where they have the second longest lead time to develop a mine from discovery to production, 29 years. So essentially, we've lost a generation of mining engineers and talent. And within the UK as well, there's this great dearth of talent coming through the system. And so regulation like the Mining Skills Act is designed to try and fill that gap. The EU Critical Raw Materials Act, and this has very far-reaching consequences because it will look at building EU quotas. So material has to be extracted, processed, and crucially recycled within the EU. This is all designed to diversify the supply chain and capture more value within the EU. Similarly, the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM, and we expect to see measures like CBAM be introduced by the other major Western economies. That's designed to stop the practice that Brian was referring to, which is essentially outsourcing your carbon-intensive industries to China in particular, but also other countries in the developing world. And so these measures will have a very dramatic effect in terms of increasing the cost, the regulatory burden on those types of industries outside the EU if people wish to then export materials to the EU. We've also seen some very interesting critical mineral strategies from Australia, not just within at federal level, but also from the state governments. And one important strand from the Australian perspective is that they have a free trade agreement with the United States. They're looking to develop similar relationships with Europe. And all of this is about the concept of friendshoring, of building new geopolitical alliances, which are designed to make sure that there is that diversified supply chain in critical minerals. Similarly, in Canada and the UK, and here in the UK, what we've seen is a focus on trying to support domestic production, encouraging investment along the value chain, which is to say, not only are we interested in mining projects like Cornish Lithium and Cornish Metals, Northern Lithium, but also in refining processes, like, for example, green lithium on Teesside, where it's actually making sure that the whole value chain can be developed in the UK. And of course, making sure that we're establishing partnerships with friendly countries. And then on the other side, in terms of the exporting countries, what we've seen is bans on the export of unbeneficiated mineral ore. So again, there's this very strong regulatory intervention. It's something you have to be very conscious of, that you can't count in many of these jurisdictions on mining the ore and shipping it to, today it's China, tomorrow it may be other international destinations. You have to be thinking about where that value will be captured. Are you going to build that infrastructure within those producing countries? And if we move on to my final slide, what I just wanted to do was have a very quick look at the impact of some of this regulation on the deals that we do and see in the sector. Because it's all very well to talk about the legal framework, but actually, ultimately, this is having a very concrete effect on the deals that we do day to day. So what we've seen as a result of these regulatory drivers is the emergence of government and government-backed investors into upstream mining transactions and midstream mining transactions. That is a really radical change from the history of mining. If you look at the development of the gold and copper markets, they're traded commodities. There's been a very robust traded market. There's been very little need for government intervention. The same, for the reasons that Brian and Anya have explained, is not at all true in critical minerals. And so that's why you've seen the US Defense Department engaging directly to do rare earth deals with MP Materials in respect of the Mountain Pass mining project. We've seen the Chilean government get directly involved in the lithium industry in Chile as a matter of national policy. We've seen the UK Infrastructure Bank provide financing to Cornish Lithium. And so all of this is a very, very new strand in terms of the players in mine finance. Similarly, in Australia, what's been interesting is to see local champions emerge. So the likes of Hancock Prospecting getting involved to invest directly in a key Australian lithium asset at Liontown. And similarly, Mineral Resources have built up a portfolio of Australian lithium assets. The national security vetoes that I mentioned before have had a very important impact on the way that deals can be done. So the Ford LFP Gigafactory had very, very intense scrutiny because it was using CATL's lithium iron phosphate battery technology. And as I mentioned, we've had several transactions in Canada where the involvement of Chinese investors in Canadian companies has been scrutinized and in some cases blocked. On the flip side, we've had friendshoring deals, for example, through the Minerals Security Partnership, which is a coalition of the willing of Western governments looking to promote critical minerals activity. And so they've funded projects like Hypermag, a very exciting rare earth permanent magnet recycling facility in the UK, Chlavelica Manganese, and also the QPM project in Australia. So that's another example of governmental intervention along strategic lines. We've seen OEMs getting involved in deals. So in order to achieve security of supply of these crucial minerals to their manufacturing processes, OEMs directly investing in mining projects. That's absolutely unheard of, in the early days of mining. And similarly, new entrants emerging out of nowhere. So there was a clear gap in the financing arena caused by the geopolitical issues between the West and China in particular. And so we've seen Middle Eastern new entrants, Middle Eastern state-backed players who have a huge amount of capital from state oil revenues and looking to build a replacement for the fossil fuels sector in their economies. And some really interesting deals with Manara coming in to invest in Vale base metals, and also the Mopani copper mines project in Zambia, Huge legacy copper project there. And International Resources Holdings from the UAE came in to invest in the project. So you can see that whenever you're engaged in critical minerals projects now, not only are there a whole host of new challenges from a regulatory perspective to stay on top of, but maybe there are also opportunities in terms of the pockets of capital and the new funders and partners that you might find as a result of that government intervention. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks, Anya.
Thank you so much, Guy. Now you can see also on the screen if you want to get in touch with Guy and to learn more about his work with FASCAN or Critical Association Committee. You can say, get in touch with him. Now I'd like to bring back Brian to answer some questions, and I think what is very interesting for our audience is that obviously U.S. elections coming up. We have already experienced what was policies of both parties in the past, and maybe you guys can tell us, what do you think would happen, whether it would be, let's say, Republicans or Democrats take the Oval Office, and how it will impact actually mining of critical minerals, and how has it impacted so far their policies?
Sure. I guess I'll take a kick at that one. I would say that it is relatively neutral with a little bit of a positive upside if Mr. Trump gets elected. If you take a look at the Biden administration, they're pretty much the green energy transition at any cost. They want the green energy transition tomorrow. They don't particularly care that electricity prices are going to go through the roof. They do not want any hydrocarbons being produced. They're also, I'll say, more focused on the processing side of the equation. So from the electrification, from the green energy transition and the electrification of everything, that's a very positive, because you need all these critical minerals in order to have that green energy transition. But at what cost? So Mr. Biden enacted the Defense Production Act, which gives the Department of Defense great powers in how quickly they can invest into a project. If you take a look at the potential for Mr. Trump being elected, he said last night that he was going to get rid of the EV mandates. And one of his favorite sayings is "drill, baby, drill." So you can see from, it's no surprise, because Mr. Trump has always been a drill, baby, drill. We want to have an energy transition, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen over a period of time. So you might see a little bit of a slowdown in the uptake of electrification. Mr. Trump, on the other hand, is also a very big supporter of mining. He has supported the coal miners in the past. And so you might see some more support from, number one, the mining side and the manufacturing side of the business, because he wants all that manufacturing coming back. And he also is very vocal about his criticisms of China and their stealing of technology, and we can't be reliant on China. So if you put all those balls in the air, I would say I give a slight positive to the Trump administration, but relatively neutral overall.
Guy, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
I certainly wouldn't presume to contradict a US taxpayer on that particular topic. But I guess one interesting thing, like I quoted Adam Smith earlier, I mean, I'd agree absolutely from a critical minerals point of view with what Brian was saying. One interesting thing is that we don't quite know yet is the impact that tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles will have. So there is clearly logic, and the EU has taken a similar position to what I suspect Mr. Trump's position would be, which is that essentially that cheap the cheapness of Chinese electric vehicles is in part due to state subsidization, and that there's an element of dumping supply onto the market in order to gain market share. The only issue with that is that the data also suggests that if you impose high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, it will slow EV adoption across the board because it will keep Western electric vehicles expensive. And that actually has quite a strong inhibiting effect on the demand for critical minerals. So what you could actually see is a tail off of demand for electric vehicles during that period that has a knock-on effect to the demand for critical minerals, which could inhibit the build out of the critical minerals supply chain during that period. So my only concern is that the baby is thrown out with the bathwater, and that by trying to build tariff walls, we end up inhibiting the development of the future clean energy supply chain in the West. But I guess that time will tell, because it seems that both the US and the EU are committed to some sort of tariff walls on China.
Thank you, Guy. Very interesting, and I actually see that according to International Energy Agency, standard EV, standard electric vehicle requires 6 times more minerals than a standard internal combustion engine car. So I would say that, and I guess, I mean, it's a question to both of you. With the demand for EV rising up, it looks like that what kind of like moves China towards this economic domination. So is it still advantageous for like global economical stability to even explore and develop further this sector? I guess since Brian literally works at electric metals, I think I first want to give him the floor to answer this question.
Sure. Well, in an ideal world, as Guy said, the Adam Smith quote, that makes the logical sense. Is we should be sending off production to its lowest cost source. The problem with that is when you start talking about national security and national defense. That's where that all goes wrong. So from the perspective of do we use tariffs? Well, I'll start with the green energy transition is happening. The question is it going to be accelerated? Is it going to be slowed down by potential tariffs on China? And whether Mr. Trump is a drill baby drill and he's going to remove those the mandates for when we have to be net zero. If we move the mandate from net zero to 2050, 2075, nobody's going to start doing anything for another 25 years. So, that regulation is important. The question is, how do you balance the regulations, the move from hydrocarbons to a green energy transition, and balancing how much do we want to pay for electricity versus how much we want to electrify everything.
And how does, just curious, if you compare like mining for fossil fuels and mining for, critical minerals, I know that like mining for fossil fuels actually involves larger operations, but how does it compare like energy? Like if you compare apples to apples, how do you compare the energy consumption?
I'll paraphrase something that I'm sure Guy has said a couple of times. It depends. Yeah, I'm actually an old coal miner, so my original thought about the green energy transition was negative because I didn't like seeing all the coal mines being shut down. However, having transitioned into the manganese side of the business, I can see a very positive benefit to that green energy transition because you pretty much need manganese in order to have it. So I'm all for the green energy transition, but from a size perspective, It's a function of the mineral that's being mined, and whether it's an underground mine or a large mine. Iron ore mines tend to be giant. Some of the copper mines tend to be giant. Bulk commodities, become very large mines, and you can have very small mines if you happen to be in a tin project or an underground mine. So from an energy consumption, it depends.
I think one thing that is important to keep in mind, though, Anya, is that the data is pretty clear that over the life cycle of the vehicle, the electric vehicle, provided that it operates, for as little as 18 months to 2 years, there's an inflection point where it is far more sustainable than an internal combustion engine. I guess it's also worth reflecting that if you live in London, like I do, that one of the big drivers in China for electric vehicles wasn't sustainability at all. It was clean air. And that's a pretty important driver. If you look at the huge urbanization that has taken place, it is not sustainable from a clean air, from the air that our children breathe, to continue with the use of fossil fuels for transport as we have. So there are various kind of imperatives. I guess one thing that is really interesting, to Brian's point about the carbon profile of mines, is that it does depend, right? Because if you were to mine in Quebec, say, or Zambia, or the DRC, places where there's very, very high occurrence of hydropower, the power that's going into your project is 100% renewable. Now, the history of remote gold mines in Canada, for example, would be that you are using diesel generators. But so one of the big pushes in all of this is to reduce the carbon footprint. And so in actual fact, mines will be consumers of renewable energy as well as part of the supply chain for its production.
And from the legal perspective, like right now, obviously there is a rise of AI, different AI technologies. What are did you see, and maybe Brian, if you have anything in your practice, this question to you too, but what are the challenges and also advantages of like AI powered exploration, let's say direct lithium extraction technologies, and let's say if electric metals navigate this, how do they navigate it, if they do it effectively? And I guess the question first is, what are the regulatory even challenges for this type of new technology?
Well, from an AI perspective, I kind of view it as going from the slide rule to a handheld calculator. When I started, dating myself, but when I started university, the professors were still checking the handheld calculators with their slide rules. So if you take a look at AI, and it's a new tool, that AI and machine learning kind of get mixed together.
Yeah.
But it's a tool that allows you to calculate things a whole lot faster than you can do in your head. And so from an exploration perspective, it just allows you to look at a volume of data that you couldn't be able to look at, and look at relationships for certain things. For example, we're going to be potentially using AI machine learning in developing a drill program to see if we can't work with our geologists and mining engineers to better optimize a drill program. And that would be one of the uses for AI that we would be looking at.
Guy, do you have anything to add from your perspective in terms of like legality of AI and like just new technologies? How, like, do you experience that in your practice, and what are the challenges that come with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, Anya, because I think I referred earlier to the length of the process from discovery to production.
Yeah.
And so what we really have at the moment is that the Western developed world has obviously, and for great reasons, a great host of regulatory barriers to developing extractive projects. Then at the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got China and Laos, places where really there's a far less environmental scrutiny of a new mining project. Now, I don't think that anyone in the mining industry would suggest that we should relax our scrutiny of projects, but I think everyone would suggest that we need to make it a much more streamlined process. And so I think the hope absolutely would be that we can use technology to enhance the environmental profiling, to accelerate the time to allow people to build these projects. Because frankly, if we can't, then it's really quite pointless to talk about building up a Western value chain, because the opportunity will be gone before we've even broken ground on the first project. I mean,
But what is it? I guess my question is, what's happening from the legal point of view? Is it like wild west there, or like is there any limits currently the government implies on using AI technologies, or how reliable they are? That's also the question. Because, for example, you know if we take even ChatGPT, right, it's good for some things, not good for other things. So I
Hmm.
guess, is there, like, especially if we talk about details, let's say ChatGPT is not great at details. It's great like for generalization, maybe things like that. But and in mining, especially when we deal with critical minerals, when they're so precious, details are very important. Do
yeah.
you guys experience anything like that?
Not from a regulatory perspective, but I would also relate it, to what you guys are doing at K-Mine. You are automating the development of an underground mine or an open pit mine in a computer. That stuff used to be done by hand,
Yeah.
and it wasn't as accurate and it wasn't efficient, and it took 10 times longer to do. If you can use a computer and generate several different models, that allows you to do some optimization. And I think it's the same thing with AI. As we, number one, it's here, it's coming, it's staying. You better adopt it. But it's also a function of, you need to understand what you're doing. When you get into the block modeling, and estimation of grade into a block using various different techniques, it's a very similar thing. If you don't understand the math behind what you're doing, garbage in, garbage out. It's the same old thing.
One interesting area, Anya, in this regard is the use of blockchain in traceability of materials. So I talked a little bit about the EU battery regulation. Traceability is a key aspect of the passport. And so what we've seen is an increased focus now from markets and regulators on ensuring that you have that kind of solution which will be completely secure in terms of showing the provenance of critical minerals.
Hmm. And I guess one of the big questions also, if you compare mining of fossil fuels with the mining of critical minerals, is like environmental impact. Maybe can you guys talk about more about, like, how does it differ between two of the industries? Let's put it this way. And what is there any studies that actually extensively analyze? And we have a question from Isaac. Has there been any studies that extensively analyze the negative economic and environmental impacts of mining the critical minerals versus the emissions into the atmosphere? Since we talk about like green energy, I think it's an important point to bring.
Yeah, that's the law of unintended consequences. So we want this green energy transition. We don't want hydrocarbons. We don't want carbon. But in order to have that green energy, it spawned a whole new sector of the mining business. You've got to go mine those materials in order to create that green energy. I'm not aware of a study that extensively analyzes the negative impacts versus the positive impacts But that's some of the discussion that's going on.
Guy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that what you see as all industries now are subject to emissions reporting, and so clearly everyone is looking at the environmental impact of the project that they're pursuing. I think what's going to make a big difference is once you get to a time where there's different pricing. So, for example, in the nickel industry, some nickel today is more environmentally friendly than other nickel, but the pricing on the main exchanges doesn't necessarily differentiate between them. Now, I think in the future, what you're going to see is that there will be different grades depending on how environmentally compliant they are. And as soon as you have that, it's going to drive a lot more regulatory challenge, and you're going to have to be absolutely clear on what the environmental footprint of your product is.
And how, if we talk about geopolitical factors, obviously, like Brian talked about, big awakening in 2022. Before that, with COVID, how does geopolitical and this kind of like factors that I guess COVID is not even geopolitical; it's not something that you couldn't even account for. But how do they influence legal strategies from securing critical mineral supplies? And is there any measures that companies can take to protect their interest in like unstable regions?
You've got to understand the risks of the country that you're working in. You've got to understand the system, the legal system that you're operating in, and do it according to the legal system that you're in. I mean, that's kind of the basic premise of going into perceived risky countries, because everybody's got a different perception of whether XYZ country is riskier than another, and you just have to understand how everything operates.
I mean, this is a
really like
fairly
a quick adaptation in the legal part of the process of the regulatory process. For example, okay, X happened. Is there any like quick regulations that usually happened to adapt to these changing factors?
well, nothing's quick in law, Anya. You should know
Yeah,
that. I mean, one of the things.
relatively speaking.
Yeah. One of the things that, as Brian was talking about, that mining companies have a very sophisticated view of governmental relations and political risk. And one of the things that you'll be looking at is, are there bilateral investment treaties between your host country, so be it Canada or the UK or the United States, and the country where they're developing the project. And so if you have a BIT, that may give you some additional protection from changes in law. You'll also see that people will try to negotiate mine development agreements. And so they're actually looking to gain some legal underpinning for the agreement that they enter into. But at the end of the day, if you're in a country and there's a change of government and they decide to take your project away, then that may well happen. And if you look to what happened to First Quantum in Panama, that's one of the world's biggest copper mines that is currently idled, really for no good reason. So I think political risk is a real risk in our sector, and that's one of the reasons why, if you have a mine in Canada or the United States or Australia, that there's a big value attached to that. You might have to pay the people more, but you'll have higher environmental standards. People will buy the product for sure because they know it's from a great provenance. And also, joking apart about the US elections, it's a reasonably stable political environment to be in.
Let's see if we have any other questions from the audience. Okay. Doran is asking, what about sodium-ion batteries advantages?
Sodium,
Yeah.
it's cheap.
Sodium.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so
Yeah. Go ahead.
sodium ion is, really interesting technology. I think it obviously is not so energy intensive as nickel, cobalt, manganese, or lithium iron phosphate batteries. So it doesn't look too promising, perhaps from automotive applications, but there may well be like utility scale energy storage, for example, where the battery isn't moving; it's just sitting there taking power from the grid. It may be beneficial to scale up using cheaper cells. And I understand that CATL have invested a lot of money in sodium ion R&D. They normally don't get these things wrong. So, probably watch the space with sodium ion.
How about critical
And
minerals?
sodium ion batteries are still using manganese too.
Yeah, so it's not all bad, Brian. Yeah, it's not all
How
bad.
about critical minerals in laterite nickel? Mohammed asking.
Well, nickel is a critical mineral. Laterite is the mineral that's in. It's typically a lower grade nickel, and that's really where Indonesia comes in, and that's like I said in my slides, probably about 60. I think if you could count on about 60% of the world's nickel coming out of Indonesia, they've imposed that they want to have it processed in Indonesia. So that's pretty much the situation with lateritic nickel.
And I guess from my personal perspective, since I'm a heavy user of EV, Brian, I think this question is for you. How do you see the future of making EV more long range? Because obviously that's what Trump is talking about, right? Like if you need to go to Delhi or like a near convenience store, EV is great. But if you need to, I don't know, travel like 100 miles.
Yeah, that's a very American perspective. It's called performance anxiety,
Yeah.
and everybody wants their car to go 400 miles on a charge. They want it to charge in less than 5 minutes, and they don't want it to degrade when it's cold. Those are the primary
Well,
issues.
I guess if you would make it equal, for example, one tank of gas equals one charge, I
Right.
think it will
And
force the
that's where this
application.
400 miles that's where this 400 miles kind of comes in, because you can get about 400 miles in a tank of gas. It doesn't matter whether it's a big vehicle or a little vehicle. I think that's 300 to 400 miles is where they go. The thing that's really going to drive it is to be able to have charging stations about the same places that you have a gas station. So when the driver feels comfortable that I can go from, let's say, Denver to New York, and I don't even think about whether I'm going to run out of gas. You getting low, you pull over, you fill up, and you go. That's what it's going to take to have the really, really big uptake in electric vehicles is to be able to charge them anywhere you need to.
Right. And I guess if Tesla will finally make it available, their network to other EVs, that would accelerate the process.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, guys, for coming today. Thank you for your time. We'll post the recording of this webinar on our LinkedIn page. It will also be available on our YouTube channel. Guy and Brian, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.